If you find yourself out in the middle of the woods hearing an ungodly roar, you may be in the presence of the Cherokee Devil.
Glen County 911.
I don't know what it was. He's walking upright like a man.
It's said that the Cherokee knew of one weakness these creatures had. However, not everyone's capable of using this word, let alone saying it. But with these monsters appearing in nearly every culture all around the world, it could only be a matter of time before you hear something like this. Sightings are continuously increasing with each year, and soon we may be forced to question what these incredible beasts are and how you may be able to survive your next encounter with what you may know as Sasquatch. But the people that called this land home hundreds of years ago, they called it the Suokulu.
Like Bigfoot, man. Bigfoot was a big one for me. I was convinced that
Really?
Bigfoot was real.
What's wrong with you?
No, this is what I found out. People want to believe in things. And once you want to believe in something, instead of looking at it objectively and going, well, I'm not sure, you like automatically go towards any information that would point to the fact that the thing is real.
If you're like most people, then you either go all in or not at all in the question of whether or not there really is a bipedal beast roaming about the lonely woods of the world. Well, I tend to look at both sides of every argument and try to spend a little time proving or disproving the credibility of each opposition. And what I've come to learn about the Bigfoot species is it's kind of terrifying.
The official cause of death was baffling. Carl apparently was squeezed to death. So either this is the first time in the history of black bears that a black bear squeezed a person to death, or something else squeezed Carl.
Bigfoot.
Every foot.
Before we get started, let me address a couple changes I'll have to be making. I won't be able to go out to locations as much as I'd like to simply because of the time that it takes to do so, especially since Connor's not a part of this anymore. And also, I did just upload a Bigfoot video a few months ago, but it really didn't come out the way that I wanted to, so I will be going over some things that I'm just not fully proud of and redoing them. But enough about that. Let's get into the video and ultimately how the Cherokee stayed safe when they encountered Bigfoot. Looking at the history of these creatures, they don't only exist in pop culture or recent sightings and unusual reports. The Cherokee society dates back several centuries and is said to have originated from other even older tribes in the Northwest, and they have long believed in the existence of a large hairy creature or a wild man of the woods, and they are not the only civilization to adhere to this belief. The Tibetans have the Yeti. Australians have the Yowie. Sasquatch has its roots in the native Canadian word Saskets. The Creek Indians called these creatures Kolowa. And recent translations have the word directly meaning gorilla. Ferdinand Magellan even supposedly had an encounter with one of these Cherokee Devils. One of his crew members, Antonio Picafetta, was one of the survivors of his expeditions, and he wrote this in regards to that encounter. One day we saw a naked man of giant stature on the shore of the port, dancing, singing, and throwing dust on his head. The Captain General sent one of our men to the giant so that he might perform the same actions as a sign of peace. Having done that, the man led the giant to an islet where the Captain General was waiting. When the giant was in the captain's and our presence, he marveled greatly and made signs with one finger raised upward, believing that we had come from the sky. He was so tall that we only reached to his waist. And this is just a pinch of all the Bigfoot type creatures that indigenous people have said exist all around the world. And if we start to take every single sighting and legend into account, the evidence becomes absolutely staggering. It's not just an individual encounter by the town kook, it's an ongoing occurrence throughout history all around the world. Now, before we move on to the story and ultimately the word that will banish the Tsul'Kalu, I'd like to address something for the skeptics. Because, I mean, why do we need to worry about surviving an encounter with something that doesn't exist? Anthropomorphism is the phenomenon in which humans put human-like qualities onto non-human things. So when we say things like, our dog looks like they're smiling, or a car looks aggressive or mean, that is anthropomorphism. So you could see a mountain and see a sleeping giant despite it being nothing but a mountain. It's because of this phenomenon countless people believe what others are seeing is just a misidentification of bears. We're putting human-like qualities onto non-human things. Now this would totally be a viable explanation for what people are saying, because bears do indeed walk upright, but only for a couple of steps. So what's to keep us from saying the 50,000 Bigfoot sightings in the last 50 years aren't just the misidentifications of bears walking upright? Let's compare them. Bears tend to have a rather large head, while Bigfoots are said to have a somewhat proportional head to the rest of its body. Bears don't have shoulders, so they can't display the large, wide frame that many of the descriptions have similar to humans. Bears can stand on two legs and even take a couple of steps, but they don't use this as their primary form of locomotion. They are true quadrupeds, meaning they are at home on four legs and only stand during fights. Bears also can't throw things. Despite bears being very agile and nimble for their size, their lack of a rotator cuff in their shoulder makes it physically impossible for them to throw things the way us humans can, or the way that Bigfoots are supposedly doing so. Bears can't furrow their brow and make faces at people the way Bigfoot is said to have done. So we're pretty sure this isn't an anthropomorphic misidentification, nor is it an individual encounter in an isolated location. These things have been seen everywhere all across the world. So what is it? Well, it's sad to say that despite the video evidence that we have, the casts that we've made, and the unidentified hair samples we've collected, we will never truly know what these creatures are, nor will we ever be able to prove to the world that they exist until we bring in a body. And from some of the stories I've heard, that isn't exactly easy to do. I'll share one story I've heard at the end after the Suokulu, because what I've heard happened to this person that did shoot a Bigfoot, it's kind of terrifying to think about. I've often wondered, if these creatures are real, then where are they? How have they evaded humanity and their perpetual advancing technology? And would I really want to see one if they were real? The Cherokee had indeed encountered these monsters, except the Cherokee woman for whom this story is about didn't know them as monsters. So this story's been shortened a little bit. I've changed some of the wordage just so that way it's more digestible, easier to understand. But I will be putting a link to the actual story that I did read originally in the description. And this is the story of the Suokulu. A long time ago, a widow lived with her daughter at the old town of Kanuga on the Pigeon River. The girl was of age to marry, and she used to speak with her mother a great deal. One day her mother told her she must be sure to take no one but a good hunter for a husband, so that they would have plenty of meat in the house and somebody to take care of them. The girl said such a man was hard to find, but her mother advised her not to be in a hurry and to wait until the right one came. Now the mother slept inside the house while the girl slept outside in the asai. One dark night, a stranger came to the asai wanting to court the girl, but she told him her mother would let her marry no one but a great hunter. Well, said the stranger, I am a great hunter. So she let him come in, and he stayed all night. Just before day, he said he must go back now to his own place. But he had brought some meat for her, and the girl had told her mother it was from her new sweetheart. Her mother was pleased, and that morning they had deer steaks for breakfast. He came again the next night, but again went away before daylight. And this time he left 2 deer outside. The mother was more pleased this time, but said to her daughter, I wish your sweetheart would have brought us some wood. Now wherever he might have been, the stranger knew their thoughts. So when he came the next time, he said to the girl, tell your mother, I have brought wood. When she looked out in the morning, there were several great trees lying in front of the door, roots and branches and all. The old woman was angry and said, he might have brought us some wood that we could use instead of whole trees that we can't split up to litter up the road with brush. The hunter knew what she had said, and the next time he came, he brought nothing. And when they looked out in the morning, the trees were gone and there was no wood at all. So the old woman had to go and get some herself. Almost every night he came to see the girl, and each time he brought a deer or some other game, but still he always left before daylight. At last the mother said to her daughter, "Your husband always leaves before daylight. Why does he not wait? I want to see what kind of son-in-law I have." When the girl told this to her husband, he said he could not let the old woman see him because the sight would frighten her. "She wants to see you anyhow," said the girl. She began to cry until at last he had to consent, but warned her that her mother must not look at him frightfully. The next morning, he did not leave so early, but stayed in the Asai, and when it was daylight, the girl went out and told her mother. The old woman came and looked in, and there she saw a great giant with long slanting eyes lying doubled up on the floor. She gave only one look and ran back to the house crying, "Uskasatiyu, Uskasatiyu," which is one thing he didn't want to be called, frightful. Suokulu was terribly angry. He untwisted himself and came out of the Asai and said goodbye to the girl, telling her he would never let her mother see him ever again. Soon after he left, the girl had her monthly period. There was a great flow of blood, and the mother threw it all into the river. One night after the girl had gone to bed in the Asai, her husband came again to the door and said to her, "It seems you are alone. Where is the child?" She replied, "There is no child." Then he asked where all of the blood had gone, and she had said that her mother threw it into the river. She told him where the place was, and he went there and found a small worm in the water. He took it up and carried it back to the Asai, and as he walked, it took form into a baby girl. He gave it to his wife and said, "Your mother does not like me and abuses our child, so come and let us go to my home." The girl wanted to be with her husband, so after telling her mother goodbye, she took up the child and they went off together to Junagunyi. Now in this story, the girl did not see Suokulu as a monster or a beast. However, there are tales where the Tsul'Kalu, the group of people, will kidnap men and women and children. And some people disagree about what it's about. Some say that it's for cattle, as if they're eating them, and others will say that it's some sort of spiritual cattle to help them get from one plane of existence to the next. But in any instance, the word that they used to protect themselves from these giant creatures was Adavanzi, or Adamzi. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. It's very difficult. At least for me it is.
Now, this last story is super short because it was a story I heard from a person on a podcast who heard the story directly from the survivor of this encounter. The guide was taking a wealthy man to go bear hunting. We'll call him Jack for short. We'll call the guide Harry. So Jack had never been hunting and was eager to shoot his first bear and mount it on his wall. While the two were out, they came upon a massive bipedal creature in the woods. Jack took aim, and Harry tried to stop him, but he wasn't fast enough. By the time Harry had reached over and pushed his gun barrel away, Jack had already fired his gun, and the bullet found its mark. The massive beast fell to the ground, and Jack smiled and cheered at the sight of his first kill. But in doing this, he unknowingly gave away their position. A loud roar that could be felt in their chest had come from off in the distance, and the two men saw another large bipedal beast barreling down in their direction. Harry jumped up and immediately ran off, casting his gun aside in the process. Jack tried to load another round, but had only half-cocked his rifle, and it jammed in his most desperate moment. Harry looked back. He saw this creature was nearly 10 feet tall and larger than anything he had ever seen. The massive beast snatched off Jack's head as if it were a grape from a vine, and threw it in his direction as he continued running. The beast gave an unholy and ungodly roar as it snuffed out the life of the man that killed what was potentially this creature's friend or mate. Harry barely made it back to his truck and immediately drove towards the main road. He looked in the rearview mirror. The beast was standing upright where his car was just parked moments ago. Had he been just a little bit slower, there may have been more than one head lost that day. He later contacted the police and returned to find the body torn to pieces. No puncture wounds, just ripped apart. Ultimately, the police said they would have to sum it up to being a bear attack because saying Bigfoot killed this man wouldn't be accepted. I would advise you this. If you're a hunter and you see a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, don't shoot it. These creatures were known as Cherokee Devils to the natives for a reason. They're powerful, ruthless, and fast. They supposedly travel in groups of 3 to 4, and they don't like humans.
And now, on to the next adventure.